Everybody, welcome to Smooth Finish. Excited to be back with everybody today. And of course, I have Mr. Chris Marcano. Chris, how we doing?
I am fantastic. It's spring. Spring has sprung. It's great. The pool season is upon us.
That means we're all going to be super busy. Wait, we've all been busy, right? Oh, Robbie, how we doing, bud?
Indeed. Romano. Back, was it a month ago? Not even. Earlier this month, I was sending you guys pictures of the snow falling out of the mountains. Now it's finally warm, 60-something degrees, and back to full steam. It's great to be back to work.
Yeah, I think I remember those videos, maybe not just pictures, and there was like some envy that I might have been in Florida in the gorgeous weather, and you were, in the snow at a pool.
I was probably very verbal about it.
Yep. maybe. I could see your breath.
Yeah.
It's been a weird start to the season for sure. I opened my pool well over a month ago, and the water temperature has still not climbed in any fashion above 60 degrees. I mean, it's just been brutal. 60, I just confirmed. It just won't get over that. So I'm hoping that it's here, though, that this warm little fleck of weather we have is here to stay. Speaking of here, we have an amazing guest with us today, and I'm so excited about this one. Brent, tell the listeners out there who we have today, the mystery guest.
Well, we are honored to have, and we're going to hopefully not embarrass her here, but Miss Andrea Campbell. Andrea has been, with the NPC for a good bit of time and so active. She has been very driven on her education as part of creating education, teaching the classes. As a matter of fact, currently she is the chair on conference education. She heads up our scholarship, which again just kind of leads back. She's an educator at heart and where she started, so she helps us pick those students that work on our topics, and even the conference committee. So she is the chair and very, very involved, and she is with Mesa Industries. She's the national sales manager there. They're a pigment company that sells to our industry. She's also her husband, Kurt Campbell, is a second. Andrea, you may have to correct me when I'm done doing this here, but in the pool industry. And they have also Bakersfield Pool Plastering, which is very successful pool plastering business. So she's got all aspects of what our topic's going to be here today. But first, Andrea, welcome. We're so happy to have you on today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm actually out in California. It'll be a good, nice 86-degree weather out here. We are in our pools. Oh, so yeah. And, I've been real blessed. I was an educator for many years, been doing this for over 16, 17 years now. I've been on many pool sides, seen a lot of good stuff, seen a lot of bad stuff. In this industry, there's probably only about 16 pigments that go into this whole world, and we mix them and blend them all different ways and ship them out to the customers. So don't always know what happens after it leaves our place, but that's what we're here to talk about.
Boy, that is the truth right there. It's for something that shouldn't be so complicated. Boy, does it get complicated, and does it get complicated quickly, doesn't it? So many variables out there in the environment. But
I tell people when they come in and they're like asking about color and how long is it going to last, and I said, you know what, it's kind of like a toy. The more expensive toy you have, you got to take better care of it. I said it just doesn't get in there and take care of itself. You have to maintain it. They don't always like to hear it, but it's the truth. So
absolutely. Let's pin this one on the board. So what we're talking about today is the most common reasons for color loss in the swimming pool, which is why we have Andrea, our pigment and color expert, on with us. We have a technical bulletin number 4 that's out. And that's, we put out technical bulletins on all different topics. And this is one that we've just recently put out. We've got it. We're putting in our social media platforms. It's available to anybody. And what we're talking about is the reasons that, what people think, the colors fade, those types of things. So we're going to kind of drill in here as a group and talk about the common reasons for color loss in the swimming pool. So Chris and Andrea, I know you guys are kind of lead this mostly, and Robbie and I will be the commenters on the side.
Yeah,
let's get going.
for those of y'all out there, if you haven't taken a look and become intimately familiar with this hot off the presses technical bulletin, you should. It was basically created to answer and identify and really kind of summarize the three main issues that occur when it comes to the color loss, for lack of a better term, in pool finish pigments. So essentially they've gathered all this data, they put it out there, but it's written in a way that's really digestible, because this is a very, very valuable resource for both a professional as well as a consumer. And it really should be looked at it like that. Like, this is something that an applicator or a professional can share with a consumer, and it really is valuable. But I think basically we should just dig into it and start with topic number one of the technical bulletin number 4, which kind of details calcium salt migration due to cement hydration, also known as pigment masking. So, being the pigment expert, the pinnacle pigment expert in the industry, Andrea, how would you describe that to a layperson?
So when water hits cement, it automatically starts a reaction, and it starts creating something that a lot of people call plaster dust. And that plaster dust, first 7 days are pretty much the majority of what comes out of the pool. And so you'll see it as white, cloudy stuff out in your water. And I think both a serviceman and a homeowner's diligent work to get rid of that. And if you don't, you'll end up with it sitting on a finish, and it will kind of make a white, hazy color over it. And people think that they've lost their color within the first couple days. So,
I mean, I think without a doubt, this is the number one thing that we have heard as a chemical manufacturer is, I just had a pool installed. They put in they shot the plaster, they did all this, they filled it with water, and it changed in the first few days. It's just too often this occurs. And you really have to understand why it's occurring, right? There is oxidation happening. There's a mechanical process as well as the chemical process that should be applied to as part of the opening. And brushing is so important, so important. A brushing routine to help knock off and displace any type of this plaster dust that's forming on the surface there, of course. Rob, what's you guys, putting as many finishes as you do on pools and up in the area you do, where you do get some pretty harsh conditions environmentally. What's your typical, what's your secret sauce when you walk these through the opening process?
Well, it's having a basic understanding, especially at the startup process, of what your fill water is. So whether you're filling the pool with a hose, know what it's coming out of the tap. If you're filling with the truck water, know what's coming out of the truck. We live in an area that's a lot of both, where you're filling with both trucked in and hose water. So having a basic understanding of what you're filling your pool with can help you balance the water properly and get it to a point where things are kind of working in synergy. Now that's a lot of work to do, because not only just it doesn't end with the actual fill. It's an ongoing process. There's a lot of chemical reactions that are going off. You've got a pool with a pH with the cement is like 12.6. So it's constantly trying to raise the pH, and it's a constant battle you could fight for. It's not just the first 30 days. It's 60, 90, maybe 120 days, depending on where you are, what your scenario is. So really tackling that early on and staying on top of it can help you combat this plaster dust. Now, what I ultimately end up seeing is they call me like 3 weeks, maybe 6 weeks later, and saying, why am I losing color? And I just go through that whole rigmarole that I just went through, pH in the wall and all that good stuff. And it's just you're not handling your pH well enough, where now the pool is essentially, because we live up in the Northeast, everybody understands snow. So the calcium carbonate, the calcium's precipitating or the calcium hydroxide is coming out of solution and snowing calcium carbonate, excuse me, is snowing on the pool, especially if you have a colored pool. Now you've gone from gray to a light gray, or maybe from a light gray to an even lighter gray. And my pool's losing the pigment. Nope, it's just under that blanket of snow that's on your pool. How do we combat that? We brush vigorous brushing, and maybe a little more aggressive water, dropping the pH, the alkalinity down a little bit, to make it eat up that plaster dust and brush it off the surface.
Yeah, water chemistry is so crucial during this process, and you can really get sideways very quickly because you're dealing with a short window too. And water, a pool water, a body of pool water, the chemistry of it, the balance of it can change so quickly, especially when you have some extreme variables going on, like you typically see in a freshly filled pool, or a freshly plastered pool. And that first 3 days is key because as we talked about, the calcium hydroxide begins to form at some level. It's essentially going to happen. It's just how can you mitigate and kind of maintain the issues that could come from that. But as that occurs, there's another chemical variable that is in play, and basically the calcium hydroxide can fuse and become a carbonate, which is even a much more difficult issue to fix. So essentially the small problem grows into a bigger, more stubborn problem. I mean, again, I'm speaking very simply here, but the cool thing about this technical bulletin is it has all of this issue. Again, this is one of 3 that we've identified, but it has all of the variables. There's cross-section images that have been taken to show you and kind of give you actual real images of what's occurring and how these things can start to form on the surface. And again, also the recommendations of brushing and water chemistry and treating with different types of sequestering agents from quality products are out there all over the place from many manufacturers that really help prevent and solve these issues too. But the best cure for this is understanding what's occurring and actually what is happening, what isn't happening in that body of water, as well as what can I do preemptively, in order to minimize the risk that these issues can cause in a fresh pool. Because let's be honest, in the first 3 to 5 days, you've got everything to lose. I mean, these are expensive things that are being put into people's backyards, and the last thing they want is that beautiful gem of a pool to change and look different than they signed up for, right? As a homeowner and as an applicator, that's going to be your worst nightmare for sure.
It is,
Chris,
Chris.
go ahead.
Sorry about that. As a homeowner, if I were going to have a pool plastered, whether it be new construction or a remodel, there's important things like when we go out to plaster a pool, fill water that's coming out of some people's taps are like 40 parts per million. Well, you guys all know what a normal parts per million of calcium, the water is a natural balancer. It wants to be about 250 parts per million. So if you've got water coming out of the tap at a very low percentage, you're going to know that when they starting, hiring a good service company to start your pool up, that you're going to want to make sure that they put the right amounts of whatever is needed in there. And if the pool water doesn't get it, like I said, it's a natural balancer. It's going to suck it out of the matrix, and it's going to come out a little more aggressive. Brent, sorry about that.
No, it's okay. So what I was going to say is we're talking about some of the other resources that the NPC offers. I just wanted to highlight real quick. So I keep hearing the solution come around, and what we're not really mentioning is so we have the NPC startup, right? And we have the startup card that's available to consumers, builders, anybody that's really willing and wants to get it. It's available online and npconline.org. And it talks about the 3-day startup. It gives you the steps, constant water fill at the beginning, the use of a sequestering, encapsulate this calcium hydroxide, the brushing, the constant running of the pump and the filter so we can capture that stuff in the filter instead of on that surface. This is it's on a simple front and back card that's available to anybody. Yeah. So I just wanted to finish the commercial on that because technical bulletin, something for sure, but then guess what? The solution we have available to you too. So I just want to make sure we we hit on that and that people knew it was available.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I've always said about the startup card, it's learn it, live it, love it, right? It's just that
Yeah.
simple.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, it really is a complete, A to Z, step-by-step process on how to start up that pool, and that first 28 or so days, maintain and ensure that finish is at the utmost and highest quality that can be delivered, and it's a win-win for everybody, the industry, the professional, and the homeowner as well. So it really is so true. So yeah, item number one, though, on the technical bulletin is the calcium salt migration that we just kind of covered, or pigment masking. It happens. Know why it happens. Understand why it happens. Andrea brought up a great point that I would like to attest to as well. We always recommend, and it's not just with a startup, it's just good general practice if you're taking over or servicing a new pool, doing a repair. But it just takes a second to test the tap water. Never assume, I've had so many horror stories, of issues that have come up with staining, scaling, I mean, you name it. And it's because there was assumptions made about the water going into the vessel, right? You just want to make sure, validate, verify, test that tap water. If there's a water softener on the house and that spigot is getting that softened water, it's not a question of you might have problems. You will have devastating issues. To Andrea's point, that water is going to it's going to need calcium, and it's going to go find it, and it's going to pull it out of something, right? And that's going to be that pristine new surface,
If you're an applicator or builder, I mean, finding out where the water source is coming from, especially if you're filling from a tap, you got to know which spigot does not have the water softener on it. Or so you don't have a 40 parts per million coming out. Or if you have the reverse, if you have a tap water where the water is 800 parts per million calcium, you got to know which spigot does have the water softener, so you can put that one in. And you're better. It could be a catch-22, but you don't want to put 800 parts per million worth of calcium into the pool. That's going to have a whole other slew of issues where the falling out of solution, because it can only hold so much. So it's understanding where you are. It's why we go back to testing the fill water. That's going to tell you where your starting point is.
Right.
And we have it.
Right. But that daily brushing, getting a sequestrant in there, and making sure that the proper chemicals are added at the right time, are going to stop a lot of those problems as a homeowner. And I tell homeowners, even if your service man comes that day to add chemicals, you still brush it another time. You cannot brush that initial pool too much. You want the best exposure, you want the best color to come out, and you want to keep it up in suspension, because what they're going to try and do is take all that calcium, kind of make it into a ball so it can agglomerate and go through the filter and get out of your pool.
Yeah, this is a great segue to our second topic in the technical bulletin, and that's the precipitation of minerals and metals. And I think it's a perfect segue, because so often the introduction of minerals and metals are from tap water, right? I mean, it's another issue there. It's like, not only test for calcium levels, for total dissolved solids, for the overall hardness and the TDS of the water, but also be on the lookout for different types of pollutants, metal pollutants like copper, iron. Those are the two main ones typically. We also have manganese, which is much less common, but there's other things that can get into that water by simply filling it up initially. And one thing I always tell people is ask if there is a well, right? You'd be surprised at how many houses actually pull off of a well. They don't necessarily have to be out in the country. And trust me on this, if it's coming from a well, you are going to most likely have issues initially. So those need to be identified and addressed. But Andrea, are there some common issues you've seen too when it comes to minerals or metals specifically?
Well, everybody understands that there are different types of pigments. So you have your organic materials and your inorganic materials. And All of them are pretty much processed very similar. All of them are synthetic today, but you just don't get the consistency that you would back in the day, where they're getting or inorganic materials out of the ground and using them. So they all go through a process, but those minerals are uh, different sizes and different strengths as well. Everybody loves those deep blue pools that you get out there, but financially, you can't get to those deep pools, and capacity wise, because there's only so much pigment you should put into a mix to get a certain color. So they'll use organic pigments that have high tinting strength, just a tint of it, along with mineral based pigments. We blend them all together to make a good formula that hopefully will endure the long lasting color inside the pool. But organic materials are much smaller in size, so they will migrate, precipitate out of the finish at a much faster rate than your mineral based pigments. Precipitate, what that means, it doesn't mean it's going to rain down on it. When precipitate out just means that it's going to, a compound that's going to, comes out of solution, coming out and migrating through this is a permeable a finish. It's not a watertight vessel. You have motion of water coming in and out all the time, and the chemical balance of your pool is key to keeping a good long-lasting color in there.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting. So not only do you risk, precipitation of minerals and metals from the source water, it can actually be a byproduct of the actual the pigment finish or the pigment process as well, it sounds like. Again, alkalinity, pH, all these variables are huge indicators too. There's chemistry involved here. Test the water, understand water balance. If you do have trace amounts of metal from whatever source, including high levels of calcium as well. I mean, calcium is a metal technically. So you've got copper, you've got iron, you've got calcium. You are much more likely to have issues with those when, of course, the water is extremely out of balance. And again, on a fresh fill, we're dealing with a lot of extreme conditions going on inside that body of water. Now, I'll get on my little soapbox here and say this is a great time. If you feel that you've tested the water, if you understand, and again, Andrea, thank you so much for kind of informing us and then bringing that insight about the blue coloration. But now, if you understand kind of what the risk is for some of this precipitation of minerals and metals, and you're concerned about that, it's a great time to use a quality sequestering agent. There's many out there. There's many companies that make really good ones. And those a lot of the better companies that will stand behind their products work with the NPC also, and really will have some products that are designed with technologies that are really applicable for this startup process. But essentially, just to quickly kind of explain sequestering, because I get this question a lot. Like there's chelation, there's sequestering. What type of things should I use? Sequestering is simply when you add some sort of a manufactured product to a body of water, and it's going to be attracted with a charge, essentially. So think of kind of a magnet that's going to find this quote unquote metal, and it's going to go be attracted to it and literally cover the whole thing up, increasing the size of that molecule to the point where it can most likely filter out through the circulation system. So essentially that's sequestering. The entire molecule of mineral or metal that's in the water is completely covered. It is a different process than chelation, where chelation, a product is added to the water and it binds with that mineral or metal, but it doesn't completely encapsulate it. It just complexes it. It doesn't completely cover it from all sides. So it kind of changes it, but it doesn't put it in jail per se. It just bonds to it. So those are kind of the two different technologies. And in this scenario, if I had to pick a chelator or a sequester, I'd go with a sequestering agent because again, it completely covers that molecule. But there are some technologies out there from different manufacturers that utilize both. So a 1-2 punch is also a really good approach. But find a product that you trust, that you like and understand, and use it along with these different techniques that are covered in the startup card that's provided by the NPC, because they really do pay off when it comes to preventing the precipitation of minerals and metals, as well as water balance. I can't stress that enough. Water balance, water balance, water balance.
Right.
And it
So
can
Chris,
change in a day.
yeah, what happens when your serviceman shows up and he's starting up your water and he's not using anything as a sequestering agent? What's your suggestion there? I mean, I think as a homeowner, I would have done my research and know that I would like to have that in my pool.
You know what? I mean, that's the best question in the world right there, because unfortunately they just see somebody with a blue t-shirt on that's got something in their body, that added something to the pool, and they think it's all everything's good. So, that's one of the goals of that we have as a group collectively too, Andrea, is to educate not only the professionals out here, but also the consumers, because, there are too many shortcuts, and depending on what market you're in, I would venture to say that most of the after the startup service provided companies out there aren't using a sequestering agent.
Yeah.
As a rule of thumb, they typically will use them if there's a historical staining in that area or scaling in that area from hard water, but I think typically they don't. So it's one of those things that we need to raise awareness, and also, really tout to how to apply these products in the right way. I mean, it should be as simple as just applying from the manufacturer's instructions, but that's another shortcut. A lot of folks, and I've seen it, they do the old, slug and glug, where they just dump, half the bottle when they don't need to add that much, or they put in a cap full when they did need a full bottle. So educate yourself on, bring into the fold quality products, but also educate yourself on the application.
Well, I think what I want to add to that, you kind of said it, Chris, is maintenance, right? So there's the maintenance. If a pool's high in solids and, you're only using sequestering at startup, but you don't continue as a maintenance product, the next time it has a real hard rain and it gets out of whack, all that stuff falls right out of solution, ends up on your surface. So, not that it can't otherwise, but, sequestrings or these types of chemicals that help the maintenance of a pool are important all the time, not just at startup. And I think the bigger conversation, and definitely leads into the third point we're going to get on, is maintenance, just maintaining your water. You can't rely on the guy every 2 weeks if it's raining every afternoon. You have to pay attention to yourself. And that's what we're hoping to educate you on, that there's maintenance that has to happen. And there's these things, again, this is available to you, information's available to you, but if you're not paying attention to the solids in your pool and the pH in your pool and those types of things, and maintaining them off schedule with your service provider, then you're most likely going to run into these. And we're going to get that phone call, and we're going to be talking about the technical pool number 4 and pulling it out of our briefcase and saying, oh, look, here's the reason this might be happening. It's not necessarily the whole reason, because you can never diagnose everything with a snapshot look one time at the pool. But generally, as we're speaking, the most common reasons, here they are. We know this, we've studied this, we've all been on these pools hundreds and hundreds of times, maybe not all of us, but a lot of us. So just wanted to make that point. Maintenance is such a big part. Sequestering is not just for startup or coulier. It's for all the time for maintenance. It should be a chemical in your pool. And then again, just the maintenance, the water balance of your pool is important, not just at startup, but for the life of that swimming pool.
Well, just to piggyback on that a little bit, and I know we're going to keep things moving, is that, again, as I mentioned earlier, the pH on the wall is so high that it doesn't end after the first 30 days. Now, our startup card covers 30 days, but the level of attention doesn't go from every day to, it continues. You want to be there at least 2 or 3 times a week and test the water, maintain the water. Now, how do you say that? How do you sell that to your homeowner? Look, I can't be here three times a week. Understood, but maybe get them involved if they're more hands-on client. If they're not a hands-on client and they have the resources to get you there for 3 times a week, take care of your finish, take care of your customer, be there that often, and maintain that water level, maintain the water chemistry.
Right. And, scaling, which we're talking about right here, the precipitation of minerals or metals, produces scaling. It doesn't happen overnight.
No.
It does not happen overnight. And we're all busy. We all get on our way, but it's kind of like a dentist appointment. You go get a good cleaning, but in between that good cleaning, you need to test your own water. You need to take it to a local shop and have them test it. You need to do some work in between a pool service company coming to keep it. So, because like I say, the scaling doesn't occur overnight. It is fixable on most occasions, but I think for me, and you guys may disagree, but the pigment masking and the surface scaling, they're going to look very similar in look.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
agree.
And you may have both. You may have both in your pool at the same time.
The only thing, like if you start
Yes.
getting into some of these other metals that are like the copper, your white finish might get a green tint to it, and that takes a while for that to happen. I've seen that a bunch of times. I've seen the manganese get a I've seen purple and I've seen it green. If you get the right sequestering agent in there, that could clear it up relatively. I don't say quick, but it could clear it up. Some pools have just been hammered for years and years and years and years without having that sequestering in there to combat the like a copper stain. And then customers like, can you mimic that? I had one, just to tell a story. I had one baby blue pool that had a pool and a spa combo on it. The spa got the copper stains on it, and it gave it this pretty cool aqua color. And the pool pretty much had more of a scaling issue, so it lightened up. And the homeowner, and I'm looking at the pool going, we got to get more like that. And the homeowner's like, no, I want you to make it more like this spa. The spa looks awesome. And that's not what we put down there, but the chemical staining or the iron stains, the copper stains, what got it to that point. But
Yeah.
that was over a year, maybe 2 years.
Yeah, it's a funny process, but it's so true. I've had the same thing. So that oxidation of copper, and copper can come into a pool and discolor it fairly easily, but it's actually it's the simple natural oxidation of the elemental form of copper, right? So when they first made the Statue of Liberty and brought it over here from France, it looked like a penny. It oxidized to that green color by basically forming a very specific tight, naturally occurring rust. It's the process of that is called verdigris. But it happens, and you will. It's a fairly easy thing to fix. You can add topical products to those stained areas of the whole pool, and it essentially draws out the metal ions, and then they can be sequestered and filtered out with a filter aid and some different stuff. But it's again to this point, it's like if the whole pool is discolored, you've got a big problem, right? And it just is what it is, but nobody signed up for that. And typically when you do get these issues like that, it's not just in a spot, it's not like, oh, a nail fell in the pool and it rusted a spot. That's understandable. It's typically a bigger issue than that. And Andrea's dead on there too. I wanted to talk about that just a bit, but the slow form of calcium getting complexed with different carbonates and forming a scale, right? A calcium-based scale. That is a slow process. That is essentially, if you look at the cross sections of examples of that occurring, it's a very, very complex structure that's formed on the surface of the pool. That's going to be different, completely different when you look at it under a microscope than some plaster dust forming, right? But to the eye of someone standing up on the edge of that pool, it's going to be almost identical, I would say. And there's a chance where they could have both of those issues occurring at the same time. You could be getting calcium carbonate starting to bloom up, to form, as well as having the calcium dust forming, which actually is going to contribute to the calcium carbonate because calcium in abundance is going to fuse with other things. So again, understand that water chemistry, follow the proven step-by-step process. And Rob, to your point, have a repeatable explanation and educate your consumer if you're a pro about this process. You can't just say, your pool looks great, see you later, you're good to go, just swim, right? It just doesn't work that way.
Right. Well, and real quick, Chris, to plug the industry, we have so many options. You can do simply a stick. Stick it in the water, it tells you where your levels are, right? I mean, That's the easiest, quickest way. You can go to the corner and have them test your water at your local store. They make things that float around the pool, and you know the technology of our industry now is awesome. You know, look at your phone. You know what the water levels are in your pool. So there's just so many products out there. It's kind of inexcusable that you can't somehow find a way to make sure that you can stay on top of that water and not point the finger, right? The one finger pointing out and the four pointing back at you. So.
Yeah. So we've as we keep moving through here, we touched on how important water chemistry is, obviously on the startup, test the source water, maintain you know, a fairly rigid process as you work your way through this crucial first few days, as well as extend that out to the first month of the pool's finish. But water chemistry really plays such an important role once that vessel is filled and once that pump and filter are operating and it's becoming essentially a living, breathing thing, right? I mean, let's just be honest here that you've got to take care of it, right? It's like a newborn baby. You've got to feed it, you got to clean it, you got to make sure that it's doing okay day to day, and you just can't turn your back on it, because that's where, you know, a day or two or three where chemistry levels, you know, pool water's parameters have gotten out of whack, they can start to cause long-term problems. And somebody who isn't really rigid, and I wouldn't say rigid, is someone who isn't really dedicated to testing on a regular basis and maintaining those parameters, is really setting up that pool to have long-term issues, right? And that's really what brings us into the number 3, which is the dissolution of cement compounds, right? And essentially this is just your finish wearing down, for lack of a better term. And it's due to oftentimes because of bad water chemistry. I'm sure we can all tell stories. Rob, what's one of the worst ones you've ever seen? Have you seen anything that's just literally crumbling away? Or
Well, a lot of times I walk up on jobs that were once gray, they're 20 years old, and they've worn down to the point where you can see the gunite, a little patch of gunite under the, or it's not under it, it's just worn down to the gunite. And they say, well, my pool used to be gray and there's just no pigment left. A lot of times it's homeowners that do take care of the pool themselves. Just maybe they've got soft water coming out of their tap, they're filling their pool, so they're constantly ignoring the calcium levels, and that's ripping the finish apart. I see that a lot. And you know, but one story in particular is more of a recent one where we put a quartz finish on a pool last summer, and I get a call from the homeowner. Just this topic right here, my pool is the color is fading. So I went go there, and it turns out it's scaling. Its pH is too high, the alkalinity is too high, and the things are just precipitating out and creating a scale on the finish. I give him a little bit of advice, brush the pool down. You know, I've been doing this for 30 years, taking care of my own pool. I know what I'm doing. Okay. Whole rigmarole I went over earlier with 12.6 and all that good stuff. Brush the pool down. He comes back and he says, I've got all these little, about 2 months later, I have all these little dots forming on the pool. Oh God. So he took the advice I gave him and said, maybe you make it I'll make the water a little more aggressive, and that way I can speed things up. And now he went to the point where he's now etching the pool. He's tearing the finish apart because the pH and the alkalinity are so low. We're talking about a 40 parts per million alkalinity. A 6 point, I'm guessing it's 6.5 because I couldn't read it on the Taylor kit. You know, it was so low. It turned a light yellow. So he made this thing so aggressive that it started ripping the finish apart. And he's buying a new finish because of it.
it sounds like Rob didn't educate that consumer on.
I did my job well.
2 of the
He did not
Technical
listen. I
Bulletin.
gave him a startup card and everything.
You know,
I gave him that pool book for dummies. Rob
When
Lowry.
you skip point 1 and 2, it leads to 3, the dissolution of cement compounds.
So, you know, I had a pool back in Phoenix, and I didn't realize, you think I don't swim all winter. I'll just kind of, it doesn't need much, no, too many chemicals during the winter time. Not realizing until I got into the pool industry, but that, I believe, is when your pool is most aggressive. It's when it's cold weather, cold temperatures, that calcium comes alive. And I didn't realize that I would destroy my finish all winter long. And all summer long, I just worried about keeping enough, sanitizing agent in there so that all the swimmers in the pool, I could keep the pool water clean. Is there some truth to this, to the wintertime aggressiveness of calcium?
For sure. We put pools to bed starting in September. We get some cold water, and then some experts out there say that as the pool's heating up and you have some calcium in the water, it starts to precipitate out, and it can create all these little, we call it winter scale, these little Rice Krispie patterns that form on the wall, or little dots, kind of like on a very small level, but dots like the candy, that form on the surface. Some come off as you balance the water, they release. Some are a little more aggressive, you have to scrape them off, and some are just a son of a bitch, and you got to drain the pool and grind the pool down. Now that is a very small amount of pools, but it's enough that we do talk about it.
That's a technical term for the listeners out there.
Yeah.
So
We're all adults, right?
But what my point is here, the more aggressive the water is and the longer you leave it aggressive, the worse the conditions are going to become. And it may not happen next month. It may be 6 months down the road that you're going to see the results of it. It's hard when you go out to a pool and you see discoloration, not normal discoloration, like, there's some cream on the top and it looks kind of faux painted like. I'm talking like extreme dark to light colors. And that's usually when I get called out as, hey, look at this. But usually they get their water balanced before I get there. Yes.
Well, you know that there's like an issue in one of the biggest things that we come across is, especially like on a renovated pool, is the pool has a leak in it, right? Mm-hmm. And it may not have been diagnosed prior to we were there. They have an autofill on the pool. So now you have an autofill on the pool, and it has low calcium. You got one of those 40 parts per million, and you can't, they're not keeping up on, they're not checking it. They're just not checking the calcium levels. And next thing you know, this thing is pitted or rough, and it, how sometimes etching can mimic scale in a way that they think, well, something's wrong with my brand new finish. It's like, what did you do, Rob? Or what did your guys do? You put it on wrong. Like, no, we have to, you're for whatever reason, 3 weeks ago when I was here, it was 200 parts per million, 250 parts per million. Now it's 150. What's going on? So yeah, knowing what your scenario, what your situation is, now you can find out there's a leak easily just by doing that. Aggressive water, I've seen pools like I described earlier, they go south in a few months because the homeowners just put a bunch of Clorox in there and it stayed clear. Oh, it's clear. I don't need any more.
Yeah. Hey, Andrea, I have a question on, so say we have a pool with aggressive water, right? For whatever reason, and to the point we just brought up earlier, when you're looking at the overall, if you're using the Langolier saturation index, which everybody should be to really get the most comprehensive snapshot of the complete state of that water. Temperatures are very, very, it's just as important as all the other factors that need to be input into that. So figure out what the temperature is, know the average temperature during the winter too. I highly recommend that so you can game plan accordingly. But for whatever reason, whether it's a acid level, a hardness level, out of whack, a combination of alkalinity low, if it's really acidic water all around, temperature, you name it, it's bad water, right? If that sits in a body of in that body of water is bad and it sits in that pool, and we leach out both the organic and inorganic pigments, right? That's essentially what's happening, right? It's loosening the binders. Is that fixable, or is that damage something that's irreversibly done? If that occurs and it's visible, can it be, repaired, or once those pigments are out, are they gone, and are we left just with a binder?
Well, they're pretty well gone. A lot of times an eighth of an inch down that finish. So they'll be gone. They'll just, especially if there's a lot of organic pigments where they're smaller, the micron size is much smaller. It is detrimental. And same thing, whether it be, you can have high levels of chlorine, and like if you got high levels of chlorine for 5 months, you're gonna bleach the color out of there as well. Just like when you have on a pair of blue jeans and you drop some bleach right on your pants, what's gonna happen? It's gonna lighten in color.
Yep.
There's normal fading that comes in the cementitious finish, like your decks, used to be bright red, now it goes into a terracotta orange, and it just keeps fading. That will happen with the best of the pigments out there. But when you destroy your pool that bad, Chris, it's hard to bring it back. And homeowners don't want to take responsibility for it either.
No, Andrea, I know here a lot of service guys, especially in the summer months, when it's really warm, really hot, they want to keep it at least a minimum level of 3.0, and we know that's above the ideal. When you're saying really high levels of chlorine, how high are we talking? 5 points, 10 points?
I've seen chlorine at 12, 15 parts per million.
Wow.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I think anything that goes in that water is coming out bleached.
Yeah.
Right, it is. And sometimes they don't know it. Sometimes they, I'll walk back, oh, we have a salt system in our backyard. We don't use chlorine. I'm like, well, we need to understand what a salt system does. And
don't get me started. Don't get me started.
Oh my God.
I'm not bashing them right now, but I'll look at all the returns, and there's just a nice fan shape, bleaching out of right at the return. And it starts to get etched there. That's the same thing's happening all over your pool, just not as aggressive. But also,
absolutely.
They're like, oh, I had a pool and it was blue, and I got it done in the 60s, and it stayed that way for 30, 40 years. And I said, well, you have to understand what's happened in our industry here. Back then they used asbestos, they used silica, they brought some organic, pigment in the 60s, and they started using it. Well, sure, with asbestos and silica, it performed very well. 70s, we started getting harsher. We thought this industry, we're going to get harsher sanitizing agents. We're going to, be able to clear stuff up a little better. So they did that. Then they started bringing in, marble and harsher sanitizing agents and marble. And then they started bringing in additives and bringing back some harder aggregates. And then the salt systems came in the 90s. So we've had a lot of change that we're all trying to keep up with pigments, keeping the pools blue. Everybody wants a blue pool. Some people want green pools. Some people want purple pools. I get all kinds of things. Red pools, bright yellow pools, like I get asked for all kinds of colors. And at the end of the day, we do our best to bring the best pigment formulation for our customers that we're dealing with. And it's hard. I can sell it out the door, and we don't know what happens to it once it goes to the job site and once the homeowner has it. But we try and live up to, the promise of the best material that we can out there in the market. We'll help them fix it. Sometimes it's fixable, Chris. Sometimes it's not. I always tell them, give it a good shot, oxidize the finish, get it real slick and slimy, dump the water, power wash it. A lot of times the evenness will come back, some of the color will come back, depending on how far underneath the finish. Because when they chip it out, you see the level of the lightness, and you see the dark color still under there. They've just nuked it or done whatever happened to the finish. But
that's really interesting, and that's also something that's such a crucial bit of data there, or fact about how the raw materials and the processes and the manufacturing of these different finishes have changed so dramatically, where we're literally not even talking apples to apples any longer. I mean, that really is enlightening. And one of my favorite misnomers out there with homeowners is, I don't have chlorine, I have a saltwater pool. That always cracks me up.
Yeah.
The old water cooler. Oh, you don't need chlorine, you need salt. It's the best. So
and they don't have to do anything. They just set it where it goes. I don't even have to touch it again.
It's the Ronco Keel food
Yes.
dehydrator of Santa.
That's what I've always said. It's the
Yeah.
Ronco. Set it and
Yep.
forget.
It's one of the, and it causes so many. I mean, we should do an episode just on this, like salt, chlorine generation. Amazing stuff. Yes.
What
But
is it?
let's identify what it is.
Learn how to use it properly. That's
So,
what it comes
so
down to.
that aside, though, I can't stress this enough because we deal with this all the time. Just to kind of elaborate on one thing that Andrea touched on there too, is like, a homeowner, to so many of them, more is always better, right? Oh, well, they said to put in a pound, shock my pool with a pound of something per 10,000. I went ahead and put in 6 pounds. Like, why would you do that? But people do that all the time, right? Or unfortunately, they're not very detail focused when it comes to properly measuring. I've said people that were using a DE scoop in a bucket of Cal Hypo, and so they thought it was a 1 pound scoop, and they were adding like 5 pounds in instead of the 1 pound they should be adding. So these mistakes happen all the time. And also, when you do have these mistakes, especially when you're using oxidizers and sanitizers and the level gets high, a lot of times if you use a strip or you're using a simple, test kit,
Right.
it'll bleach the reagents right out. And these folks are like, well, it looked real clear and fine. And they're getting false readings. So let's just assume that the homeowners, even the ones that are trying their best, are going to be most likely the most inconsistent factor to the maintenance of this swimming pool, right? It's just the human nature of things. And you can really get sideways in many different things. And it's really interesting to hear the effects of improper levels being added when it comes to sanitizers that can actually affect the coloration of the surface. That's fascinating.
I'll tell a funny story on my family. I'm on the road traveling. My college kids are home. There's 3 of them in the house. And they said, hey, Mom, the pool's turning green, right? I'm in Phoenix. I'm like, hey, well, get a couple tablets out, throw it in there. I'm thinking, throw in the little floaty thing that's floating around.
Yep.
And I come home. Well, there's these 3 tablets on the bottom of my pool. Didn't think much about it. Pulled them out, threw them away. And I'm like, you guys, I meant put them in the little floaty. Didn't think much about it. About a month or 2 later, pool got really aggressive because the kids didn't, I was gone. The kids didn't, balance the water. And I called my husband and I was like, hey, I've got these spots on the bottom of my pool now. And he comes home and he's like, you remember when you told the kids to throw in those tablets? See those round rings on the bottom? That's what's happened when you have, it's just bleach just coming out of there and just burning your finish off. So yeah. It happens to the best of us. And was it, I lived that way. I got them cleaned up a little bit, but I lived with them on the bottom of my pool for the rest of its life. So
It happens to the best of us. It
does.
happens to the best of us.
It does. And Rob, like you said, how long, if I have way too much chlorine in there, for how long? Greg Garrett used to say 12 weeks. If you have a high chlorine content in there for a good 12 weeks, you're gonna destroy the color. It's gonna fade.
Especially if it's at 10 or 12. My God.
Greg ran into some crazy ones sometimes. And I don't know if homeowners really even understand how it gets that high.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, they don't.
When you're not getting a chlorine reading because something else is bleaching out the chlorine reading, that's how you get that.
Locked. Chlorine lock.
Yep. Okay.
Well, listen, I think Chris, what do you think? I think we've covered the technical bulletin number 4. I think
very well.
People should know that this is available to them. Andrea, thank you for really digging in and drilling down for us and help us understand.
Something else I want to say here. We've talked about these. We've talked about these 3. We've talked about pigment loss. We've talked about salt migration. Just a minute. Surface scaling and the last one, you guys help me out there. What's the first one pigment masking, scaling, and then the pigment loss. You can have in a pool, you can have all 3 of them at the same time, because by the time there's an issue in a pool with color, it's months down the road. You don't know what's happened with the water before, where it's been. Did they dump it? Did they just correct it for us to come visit? You can have all three of them happening in a pool because the pool has been in different conditions at different times. So like Chris says, water maintenance is your best friend when it comes to keeping your finish blue or whatever color you choose it to be.
Absolutely. Guys, I think let's let these people get back to their days. Andrea, thank you so much. And if you want to get this technical bulletin or any of the bulletins that we have available to you, npconline.org. Thank you for the smooth finish. And guys, have a great afternoon. Stay on for a second. We'll talk right after. And have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, Andrea.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Chris.